we've traded some bad people to get good people, innocent people back. And you would think that my numbers would be skyrocketing up, and yet they're not. They're going in the opposite direction. So the math proves that assertion to be wrong. When we make these hard decisions and the president makes the tough call to send someone back in a trade like this, our numbers are actually going down.
Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Jason Rezaian. I'm an opinions columnist here at the Post. Earlier this month, on August 1st, the headline driving the day was that several Americans wrongfully detained in Russia were being freed in a prisoner swap, a historic swap, the likes of which we hadn't seen since the Cold War. It resulted in freedom for a Post contributor, my colleague Vladimir Kara-Murza, along with Wall Street Journalist reporter Evan Gershkovich, Radio Free Europe reporter and editor Alsu Kormasheva, and former Marine Paul Whelan, who'd been held in Russia for over 5 years. One of the key players in negotiating that swap and the release of those friends and colleagues is my guest today, Presidential Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens. Ambassador Carstens, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Jason, it's good to see you again.
Always a pleasure. Ambassador, you and I have spoken many times over the past several years about your work. I have a personal connection to the work that you do since I was arrested and detained, held in Iran for 544 days. The wrongful detention designation didn't exist in an official way at that point, but I imagine had you been in the job, you would have deemed it a wrongful detention. I want to talk about several details tied to your job, but I really want to start with this recent homecoming of these four compatriots of ours. That prisoner swap under 2 weeks ago was significant because it included a wide number of countries and many leaders were involved in this process, from adversarial states, including friendly ones. In a conversations that you and I had, I would say about 13 months ago, you indicated that you thought you knew what it would take to get these Americans home, and it would take about a year. Thinking back, did this deal come together in a similar way that you had anticipated, or did it change over the course of time?
Hey, Jason, first off, grateful to be on screen with you. I also want to thank Lauren for bringing us together. It's always good to talk to you about this topic. You know, I would have to say it did kind of play out the way that we thought it would play out. I think it was probably about November and December of last year. And even before then, we were talking to Secretary of State Tony Blinken about what it was going to take to get this done. And I think there was just a general recognition across the entire government, whether it was us, the CIA, the Wall Street Journal, but I would say the White House, that it was going to take more than just a one-for-one swap. We'd had some success, of course, getting Trevor Reed home and Brittany Griner home, but in the wake, it just seemed it was going to be hard to try to bring Paul Whelan home. And when Evan Gershkovich was taken, it seemed like it was just going to be quite challenging. And Secretary Blinken challenged us to find a way to be creative about doing this. We thought about trying to enlarge the problem, to bring more people into the solution set so that we could perhaps bring partners and allies to the fore in a way to bring to the Russians something that would make sense to them, while also being able to provide things that the United States could give. And I think when we all started to realize the importance of the assassin Krasnikov, who was held by the Germans, the problem took yet another dimension. So again, we kept trying to expand the problem. So I think when I talked to you, just trying to give you a thumbnail sketch of where we were, I figured it would take a while to pull this together. But through great diplomacy, whole of government efforts, and I would even say efforts from journalists, members on Capitol Hill, people in the NGO community, a lot of people came together to include our partners and allies, most notably Germany, Slovenia, Poland, Norway, and Turkey, to bring this deal together and make it happen.
When you do one of these deals, when do you feel like you know that it's over, it's a success? Is it a handshake? Is it a signature? Or in a case like this, is it literally seeing those individuals getting onto a plane and being greeted by you or other members of the U.S. government?
Well, showing you that I've learned something while in government, allow me to answer that question while not quite answering it. So I feel like I have three different answers for that. To my mind, we're always going to get the win. It may take a year or two, but we will find a way to bring someone home. So right at the very beginning, when someone's taken, in my mind, this is a foregone conclusion. That person's coming home. The only question is when. The second answer I'd give is, yeah, you almost get an intuitive sense when you shake someone's hand, like I literally did in one case. And right there and then, my gut told me that this was going to happen. Still need to play out over a few months, but I think right there, to my mind, a deal was sewed up and we were going to conclude it. But the soldier in me is never quite comfortable until that we either clear airspace and we're flying out of an opponent's airspace with those Americans on hand. And even more to the point, when they finally land on a U.S. tarmac, walk down the gangplank and fall into the hands of their loved ones, that's when I really feel like this is done. And that any feelings of queasiness I might have had in my stomach that something might go wrong will dissipate.
You talk a lot about that whole of government approach to what you do. Since you took this position back in 2020, the office has grown out substantially under your leadership, going from a special presidential envoy for hostage affairs and a deputy to a much bigger operation. Many of the members of your team were involved in this. Can you talk about some of their roles, what they do? We don't hear that part of the story very much. I obviously track these things in the NGO community, in the journalistic community, but in your own shop, what does that look like? And how many people are working on a case like this?
Yeah, sure. First off, I probably need to thank you. I wouldn't probably have this position still if it wasn't for you writing that op-ed during the transition a few years back. So, when I come into work, I have to thank people like you, Diane Foley, David Bradley, the U.S. Congress. People worked hard to make sure that we were able to bring these resources together. But there was a time when we had 4 people in the office, didn't have much in the way of things to bring to bear to solve it. Right now, I hover at about 25. I have people that are on loan to SPIHA full time from other government agencies. And these positions range anywhere from a case officer, like the one who helped work on a Russia case, who does nothing but European cases, in this case, focusing purely on Russia. I will have people in family engagement, a full time psychologist who's there to help work on the detainees as they come back, provide resources to the families as they're waiting the return of their loved ones, and also tries to oversee care provided to the detainees and the families, thanks to Congress after the fact, after they come home to the United States, because their journey's still ongoing. Also have people that are geared towards covering media, Congress, et cetera. But the idea is that when we do this, it's never just SPIHA. It's never just us. There are people in the State Department, people at the White House, the intelligence agencies, the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Commerce, Treasury. It's a full court press from the U.S. government. And again, I just have to say thanks to our partners and allies and members of Congress and the media and NGOs that just pulled us together. I'm often mindful that if you just took one of those people out, it could be a member of an NGO, it could be a senator, or it could be a reporter who's trying to shine a light in this problem. You remove one person, and there's a chance that someone like Evan doesn't come home.
It is quite an incredible thing, and I want to acknowledge that the hard work that you and your staff does. I've seen it up close and personal. I've benefited from it many years after the fact of my own imprisonment, and I think it's a really important office that deserves the resources and respect of the government and taxpayers alike. Talk about the role of diplomacy in all of this. German Chancellor Scholz said, "For you, I will do this," to President Biden. How did diplomacy and some of these dynamics between leaders of various countries factor into the success of this deal? And what role do those individuals that you talked about in the NGO community, maybe people at a law firm or a public relations firm or a journalist, what's their role in helping to connect these dots?
Yeah, so diplomacy played a huge role, and obviously, since we're pulling in so many different countries. And I think as President Biden says, and Secretary Blinken have said, it's these relationships that we have been just building by painstakingly, step by step, that really played off during this return. I mean, the relationship between the president and Prime Minister Scholz was critical. I think that personal relationship as well as the bilateral relationship was absolutely key to getting this done. I think the work that we've done with countries like Poland and Norway and Slovenia and Turkey were also important. Some of it's just the standard bilateral things that we do, but I'd also say there's been an emphasis in this administration on trying to really strengthen the connective tissue that goes between these countries and ours, and also the multilateral organizations and institutions that bring all these countries together. So diplomacy played a huge role. What was a little bit different and interesting to me is that I would say the intelligence agencies of our country played an outsized role in getting this job done. There are a lot of unsung heroes that really played a big part in trying to bring this deal together. And additionally, the White House played a very strong role. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and his team were instrumental, especially as we went down the remaining months before this deal, to tightening up those loose springs that might be there and making sure that everyone was on board with how we were going to get this done. Complicated problem, a lot of moving parts, lots of players, and it took a full frontal assault, basically from the White House, the intelligence agencies, the Department of State, and others to ensure that it was all working together. But this could not have been, we could have not have done this alone. You and I have always talked about this, that bringing people home is a team sport. You can't care about who comes up with a plan, who comes up with the negotiation, or who gets the credit. You all just have to keep working, rowing in the right direction, pushing towards that final result.
I'll follow up on that. You've been on this job for coming up on 5 years. Those diplomatic relationships have clearly evolved. Is a big part of that the recognition among partner countries that this is a growing problem or has been a growing problem? We're not the only country that is affected by wrongful detention and hostage taking. Talk a bit about that sort of global coalition work that's being done around this issue.
Yeah, Jason, I'm glad you went there, because if you didn't, I was going to try to steer us there anyway. I think what's really important to this is that, you know, the president has shown some great strength and courage in making some hard decisions to bring Americans back. But you want to get the sense that one day this problem set comes to an end. And to that mind, we've been working with partners and allies everywhere from the Canadians, who pulled together the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations and have brought on 78 signatories to that document, to the work that we've done with a lot of partners and allies to try to start working on a multilateral global coalition. You know, global problem, global solution. We're trying to bring these countries together and try to explore the tools that we all can use together to raise the cost of a nation state taking a citizen of one of our countries as essentially a political bargaining chip and make this problem go away. Maybe the best way to explain it is there are tools that my office has. We have a sanctioning tool. We have a visa restriction authority, but we don't just want to be using sanctioning authorities from now for the next 10 or 20 years. What we want to do is explore the tools that we have across all elements of national power. So that could be diplomacy, information, military, law enforcement, legal, financial, economic, to pull these tools out and be ready to use them in the service of ending this problem, but also working with our partners and allies so that one day when a country like Russia takes one of our citizens and arbitrarily detains them, we all, as a multilateral coalition, can visit some of these tools to raise that cost. If we do this and do this well, I think Secretary Blinken's of the belief that we can put this problem on the dustbin of history.
You think we're getting closer to that than the day you started this job?
Oh, absolutely. That train's left the station. I mean, we've already been meeting on this with our partners and allies. We've already been exploring tools. A few of them have been put into use. So this is not waiting for something to happen. This is a solution that's in motion, and that train just needs to keep building up steam until we get to that point where we all can raise that cost to the point that we break our opponent's will to take our citizens.
You know, one of the ways that I talk about this to people who aren't affected by a hostage taking or a wrongful detention is to explain it as a really unique kind of abuse of power. It's a geopolitical play directed at an individual, at an innocent individual. And in the sort of backdrop of that are families. And I want to talk about how important the families are in this process. How can they help? How do they help? What role do they play? Since, you know, the wrongful detention designation and your office were born out of President Obama's review of hostage policy, families have been much more a part of the process of recovery than they were previously. How do you think of them as partners, and what sort of responsibility, hopes, and expectations do you have from them, and vice versa?
So, Jason, when we first take a case, we try to, within the first week, fly out to visit the family of the person who's being detained. So, if that family lives in Massachusetts, Kiev, if they live in California, we're on an airplane. We fly out there with 2 or 3 members of my team. We'll usually spend 3 to 4 hours in their living room talking about their loved one, try to get some more facts of the case, get an understanding of what they're going through, the family, what they're enduring. And at a certain point, we start to shift the conversation over and we talk about what it is the government does, what our architecture looks like, and we finally neck it down to the actual plan that we have and that we're thinking of that we believe is going to bring their loved one home. And essentially, what we tell them is, yesterday you felt it was on your shoulders to bring your loved one home. As of right now, that's my responsibility. That weight is on my shoulders, but we want to partner with you because we're not going to get this done by ourselves. So we usually have weekly calls with the families. Sometimes they're daily calls with the families. We have members of the intelligence services that work to declassify information so that we can brief the families and give them a sense of where we are in the map sheet and bringing their loved ones home. We bring them to Washington, D.C. We work with them to meet senior members of the U.S. government. And this is not just important to my office. It's important to Secretary Blinken and the president. Secretary Blinken, on his 6th day as the Secretary of State, had a VTC with over 70 family members whose loved ones were held overseas. Secretary Blinken keeps a copy of all the people that are detained wrongfully or held hostage in his suit pocket every day. I think he's talked to every single family so far, either physically or by VTC. So what we want the families to know is that we're partnering on this. This is not government as usual. We are going to get with you. We're going to give you information. We're going to cry with you. We're going to hug you. We're going to fight through this and get through it together. And that's the feeling that we want them to have, that we're working together on this, and we are not going to be cold and distant. We are going to embrace each other and try to fight to get this done.
The numbers of cases has dropped dramatically, but there's still 20-something cases left. Examples like Mark Swadan and Kai Li in China, they've both been held for a very long time. While we're discussing this, I have to point out my colleague, Austin Tice, who should be home visiting, celebrating his 42nd birthday with his family this week. Instead, we'll be marking 12 years since he was abducted in Syria. Can you talk a bit about the relationship with the family like the Tices or others, and how you maintain that hope, and what kind of efforts you can share with us in bringing Austin home?
I would never want to speak for the families. What I can tell you is that we're available, of course, at their cadence to give them updates and give them a sense of where we are. We try to be very transparent. If we're not succeeding or we're not actually making progress, or even if we fail, we make sure that we tell the families that we've had a setback. So it doesn't help us to do anything other than just be totally honest to make sure that we maintain the trust. Some of these cases are extremely hard. As we say, the opponent has the key to the jail cell. It's hard to I guess, struggle through a case like Austin Tice without the realization that the people that we believe that are holding Austin Tice have the keys, and they have, to an extent, great control over how this outcome goes. But that doesn't detract from our responsibility as a government to try to keep working every angle that we possibly can. I think October 7th, in a way, in some areas, made it a little more difficult, but we can't fold our hands. We can't sit in our hands. We have to find ways to break through these log jams or stalled periods to keep pursuing this. It's just a hard, tough business. I mean, as they say, the Canadians and the Belgians are not holding American citizens. That they're usually the toughest countries with whom we have relations, or sometimes we don't have relations. And yet our job is to struggle through all that tension and find a way to meet with the other side and come up with that release mechanism that's going to allow us to bring our citizens home. And as you've seen, sometimes it takes a long time, and it's painful to watch and go through, but we can't quit, and quitting is not an option.
And that's something that I wanted to bring up. I mean, going back about 2.5 weeks on the day that the Hamas leader in Tehran was assassinated, had a whole slew of people asking me if I thought that this would derail negotiations on these other prisoner deals with Russia and so forth. Talk about that ability for U.S. government, friendly governments, but adversarial ones, to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, you have a single job to do. Your job is to bring people home. In the backdrop of a situation where we are at war, or an ally of ours is at war with this country that is holding American citizens, uh, how difficult is it to compartmentalize these things and focus on priority number one, which is bringing Americans home?
Well, Jason, it's a fascinating question in terms of how difficult it is. For some reason, it just happens. You know, you and I once talked about the prisoner swaps that took place with POWs during the Vietnam War in 1973. You and I have also spoken about the way the Russians and the Ukrainians are finding ways, even in the midst of a shooting war, to trade POWs back and forth. And I think I've found that in this job. In 4.5 years, we found ways to talk with countries with whom we have no real official relations. We don't have an embassy in their country. And yet, despite the tension, we found ways to bring people home. So I find it fascinating that no matter what's going on between two countries, to include the United States and the various countries that seem to take our citizens, that we're still able, amidst all this tension, to be able to sit down and have a discussion about how to bring people home. And it works. I mean, I think you know the numbers. Under President Biden, we've brought home 50 Americans who've been held hostage or wrongfully detained, and our numbers have been dropping.
You talked about the deterrence efforts. Of course, every time you do a swap or any kind of deal that offers anything in return for the freedom of an American, you are going to be barraged with questions about whether or not this is going to incentivize more hostage taking. In a situation like this one, we worked to get the Germans to release Vadim Krasikov, a convicted killer. In the case of Brittany Griner's release, it was the arms dealer Victor Boot. How do you weigh that moral question of letting someone who is convicted of very serious crimes go in return for the freedom of an innocent American?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the moral imperative outweighs the moral hazard. You know, and as Secretary Blinken's fond of saying, that when we are willing to fight and struggle to bring home an innocent American, and the other side wants to bring home a convicted assassin or someone who might have been involved in drug trafficking, that says a lot about what they value, but it also says a lot about what we value. We value the lives of our citizens. We want them to come home. We want them to live in freedom. And that's very important to us. It really speaks to our values. And strangely, as I think you and I were also discussing earlier, common sense would dictate that if you made some of these trades, you would be incentivizing the other side to keep taking more Americans. But the math is just not proving that so. There was a time when I had 54 cases. We're now down to a little over 20. And you keep in mind, we kept adding cases. So we've brought back 50 Americans. Our numbers are getting to be quite low, and they're just not going up. We don't find that the other side is, as we say, restocking the pond by taking more Americans. So this comes down to what a country values and the responsibilities of the U.S. government with regards to its citizens that are taken. And in a way, I almost have to look at your case. I mean, you've been back for years now, and I'm glad you're back. And the things that you've been able to do in your life between, a birth, becoming a father, being able to raise a child, and the work that you've done in the field of journalism, the wonderful work that your wife has done. I mean, it speaks to the importance of bringing people back and letting them get on with their lives. And sometimes the president has to make hard decisions to make that happen.
Well, and when we talk about incentives, I always tell people I think that's the wrong question. The question is, what are we doing to make this less attractive?
Yeah.
I don't think that at the moment, we can credibly say that there's enough standing in the way. Going back to your early point about developing deterrent strategies, but do you think that as we enter into November and beyond, your numbers are down right now, but are you worried that there will be spikes, based on things that we can't even predict at this point?
I mean, I always have to be worried about that. I mean, I could say we're not only working on deterrence, we're working on prevention. We've, as you know, passed out the D indicator. It's an indicator that lets people traveling to certain countries, makes them aware that that country has a history of detaining Americans. So you get a warning there. I think we want to get to the point where we work with travel companies to ensure that people are very aware of the risks that are associated with going to certain countries. We've worked with a lot of businesses, whether Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, to make them aware of the problem. But at the end of the day, Americans are going to be journalists, they're going to be aid workers, they're going to have the spirit of travel and adventure in them. So we don't want them to shut down their lives. We just want them to be better aware so that they can mitigate the risks of actually getting out there and traveling. Uh, if people are taken in the future, and of course we can expect that they will, what I can tell you is that your country, over years of painstaking work and with the help of the U.S. Congress, has built an architecture and institutionalized a way of doing business that we believe will be successful in bringing you back. If you're a blue passport holder and a country wrongfully detains you or a terrorist group takes you hostage, your country is not only going to try to move heaven and earth to bring you back, but we've now institutionalized the tools that are going to enable us to do that better, faster, and quicker. But the job's never done. We have people out there right now that are waiting for us to find a way to get them released. And we have people out there right now that one day will be taken. And what I can promise you is you're going to get this government's best efforts.
I want to talk about that a little bit more. I mean, I think this job is at the ambassadorial level. This is clearly an issue. There aren't that many special presidential envoys out there. President Biden declared a national emergency around hostage taking and wrongful detention. Talk about how this narrative of this scourge has changed within government, but also in the public eye. I can tell you that the point that you just made about being safe to travel around the world was something that you and I grew up taking for granted. The blue passport, or in my case, being a member of the press, was sort of felt as though it was a protective shield until it wasn't. Now it's become a bit of a target. Why is this so central to our notion of citizenship? And do you think that message is filtering down to ordinary Americans?
I think the message is filtering down. So I kind of reversed my answer to the question. A lot of it has to do with the great work that the media has done. Now, look, you're not partnering up and cozying up to this. I mean, the media has held us accountable. You're tough. You ask the tough questions when you must. But the very fact that there's been an increase in the reporting has helped us a lot. People now know of this problem and understand the solution set. They know of this problem and understand the risk mitigation procedures that they might want to go through. So I think the level of awareness has been dramatically increased. And that frankly gives us a lot more room to play with in terms of making decisions to bring people home, understanding that we'll probably most likely get some broad support. And I think what that's also done, and maybe this kind of ties in, it's the fact that this remains one of the few nonpartisan, or maybe you want to call it a bipartisan issues out there, where Republicans and Democrats, people of any political leanings, are interested in helping us solve. If an American's taken, you'll see people from all walks of life, all parties, rallying around that cause to bring that American home. So if anything, this has been something that I've witnessed to be a unifying part of what this government delivers, but also unifying from reversing it and looking at what the average citizen in the United States is thinking about this. They're supportive, they're aware, and when we bring someone home, we can usually count on someone raising up the American flag and welcoming their fellow Americans back to life as a free citizen.
I can tell you, for me, seeing people come home is one of the most reaffirming moments. I wait late at night and follow the trajectory of the plane and see those people touch down. It reminds me of a key moment in my life. And it is a very important quest to free these folks. Ambassador Roger Carstens, we're about out of time. I want to thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you for joining me on Washington Post Live.
Jason, thank you. From all those phone calls that you and I used to have when I was driving home from work trying to figure out how to do this job, to now when you're still shining a light on it. Thank you for your advocacy, and thanks for holding us accountable. Grateful to have been here with you today.
And I want to thank everybody who's watching today. To learn more about our upcoming programs and to start a free trial subscription, please visit WashingtonPostLive.com. It's been a real pleasure to be with you. I'm Jason Rezaian. Have a wonderful afternoon.